Привет, товарищи! Это Тенёцкий Nebo. Today we're going to be looking at Russian light tanks. Each Russian light tank is quite different from the other, apart from one exception, which is the similarities between the T-70 and the T-80. But they're all very different vehicles, so I've had to group them all together, instead of making a separate video for each one. First of all is the T-26, battle rating 1.0. This is Russia's reserve tank. The Germans get the Panzer II, the Russians get the T-26. This tank is a copy of the British Vickers Mark E. It's a model 1938 version, and you can tell this because it has a oval-shaped turret. The model 1933 had a circular turret with a boxed extension at the rear. Over 10,000 T-26s were built by 1940, which easily made the Red Army the world's largest armoured force. In fact, the Germans were outnumbered 4-1 when they invaded with Operation Barbarossa. The model 1933 introduced the 45mm 20K, which is the model 1938's weapon as well. The standard AP round could penetrate a Panzer IIIF at 1,000 meters, but unfortunately Soviet tanks didn't have the optics to allow accurate long-range fire, so practical accurate range fire was a lot less than that. A few variants of the T-26 were developed. One variant tried to address the lack of armour. The T-26 is not a very heavily armoured tank. Most of the tank is 15mm or less. One variant that attempted to address this was the T-26E, the Ekranami, which means with plates. This had 30mm plates bolted onto the front, side and rear of the turret, and the front and side of the hull. This really improved survivability, especially against earlier German anti-tank guns, like the short-barreled 50 and the Pak-36. But the tank weighed just over 2 tons more than the regular version, which really put a lot of strain on the engine and the transmission, so drivers were advised to use lower gears. Next is the BT-7, battle rating 1.3. This particular version in-game is the model 1937. This used the Christie suspension system, which is an American invention, which allowed the wheels to absorb more force. There was a lot more play in the springs, so the wheels could move up and down further. It was a development of the BT-5. The BT-7 was essentially Russia's main battle tank in June 41. It was superior to the T-26, so it saw a lot of demand. It used the same gun, but the armour was not very thick, but it was at least sloped. But the main selling point was the big V12 engine, which made the BT-7, already a light tank, didn't weigh very much. It made the BT-7 very fast, which allowed it to flank around the enemy and to, in some cases, even avoid fire. The model 1937 introduced this new turret, the sloped conical design, which was based on the T-26's, which provided better protection, and it also increased the amount of ammunition that could be stored inside. It also introduced a new gun sighting system, which improved accuracy on the move. Next is the T-50. This is battle rating 2.3. The T-50 was a light tank which incorporated a number of very advanced features, but only 69 of them were made because it was too complicated and expensive, and overall the T-34 was the better choice. It was no more expensive, but it was much more capable. It was a planned replacement for the T-26, but the T-34 superseded both of them. It was unusual for a Soviet tank of the time because it in fact had a 3-man turret. That may seem surprising because the turret isn't very large, but it did have a commander, a gunner and a loader inside it. It also had a commander's cupola, which is unusual for Soviet tanks of the time, and every single T-50 made had a radio, unlike other tank variants like the T-34 and the T-26, where only the commanding vehicle of each unit had a radio. It also had sloped, thick armour, which was welded, and it was a very, very tough design. It used a 300 horsepower V4 engine, very unusual design, and it was in fact created specifically for this vehicle, but it was extremely unreliable, one of the most unreliable engines the Russians attempted to use, and it was for this reason, amongst other things, that it was ultimately cancelled and dropped in favour of the T-34. But the 69 that were produced did see combat. Next is the T-60, battle rating at 1.3. This was a scout tank. It was armed with a 20mm TNSH, which was based on the Shevak aircraft cannon. The light armament meant it couldn't really engage enemy armour with any reliability, so it was used primarily for reconnaissance and infantry support. It was ultimately superseded by the T-70, which was chosen instead and saw continued production, and this was dropped to allow that to be produced as an alternative. One was converted into a glider tank known as the A-40, which was designed to allow quick deployment of armour at the front line, but that was unsuccessful. Next is the T-70, battle rating 1.7, the successor of the T-60. This had a very sharp angled hull, which provided good protection, and a small turret, which offered a small target, and it was also well protected, particularly the mantlet. It only had a two-man crew, which was the driver and the gunner/commander/loader. And he also had to operate the radio. So the commander of this tank was a busy fellow. It had a pair of 70 horsepower engines, which gave a very good power-to-weight ratio. It was superior to equivalent German light tanks, but it quickly became outclassed by late 1942, particularly with medium tanks of German design being mounted with variants of the Pak-40. The designers attempted to keep it updated, which resulted in the T-80, which is here at Tier 2 and battle rating 2.3. Yes, 2.3. Thought I read that wrong for a moment. This was the final Soviet light tank produced in the Second World War. It had a two-man turret and a three-man crew. It had improved protection and a better power plant, but only 120 were built because the light tank concept as a whole had become obsolete, and it gave way to the medium tank, particularly the T-34. However, the T-70 chassis did live on in the Su-76, which used a lengthened and widened T-70 chassis, and that became a very effective anti-tank and infantry support vehicle. So the T-80 has slightly better armour. It's got a redesigned larger turret, and it had a gunner inside the turret, so the commander wasn't quite as busy. So, that's the Russian light tanks. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Reach for the Sky. See you soon.